Have you ever thought about painting and then thought, I can't be bothered to get everything out. I just haven't got a space for this. This video is all about setting up your own workspace, one that's perfect for you. So I can imagine you sat at home thinking, yeah, it's all rolled for you. Look, you've got your own studio. But I haven't always had a studio. I started off on my kitchen table. Not only did I start off on my kitchen table, I used to do resin on the kitchen table. So I had to clear everything out. I had to put my mask on. There's always some setting up and taking down, but I also really understand how if you haven't, it's almost like if you haven't put the thought into that, then it's easy to say, I'm not going to do that today. Even in this space, you would think that it's easy for me to just come in and paint whenever I like, but I still have to do some setting up. And at the moment I am set up because we're just getting ready for an art exhibition, which means that there's more painting to do and more finishing and all of that sort of thing. So I'm very set up at the moment to do it, and I thought it was a great time to show you a little bit about my workspaces now. That might give you some ideas, but also to explain that I did start with, in fact what I started with was just a very small caddy that had my watercolour kit in, and I'd have a board. I've got a board over here just with some paper on, and that was fairly easy. I think I had a folder that I could just put all my work in, and that was fairly easy to transport and to from one table to another. And I definitely was using the kitchen table. Once I started to work a little bit bigger and I was working on easels and that, then I moved into, it was a studio that was in our third bedroom actually, and I had to think about it quite hard to be able to protect the floor. So see these jigsaw pieces there, I bought them for that purposes, just to cover up the carpet, because that's another thing that stops you. You worry about getting paint everywhere, and I still feel like that in the studio. And you might not think that having my own studio I would feel like that because it's dedicated to it, but I do use this for other things as well. So this is also a family space. We have our Christmases in here, and I don't want to get paint everywhere. Not if I can protect it. You will get the odd bit of paint. I've definitely got paint on this sofa, but don't tell anybody. What I wanted to show you first was the table that I paint on if I am taking some overhead shots. And the idea of this is that this is more likely to be the sort of table that you've got if you've just got a table in one of your rooms, or you're setting up a table in your kitchen. If you're fortunate enough to have your own table where you can leave things set up, then you can see on this table I've got paints that I've got set up so that I can just put my hand to some materials, and I've also got some woodies, some pens. You can see I've got glue and things like mediums or anything that I'm going to use, and I've got a stack of paper on the one side as well. So all I need to do to actually get started painting here is grab a paintbrush and some water and a bit of kitchen roll, and I'm off. I'm ready. The surface is protected. If you notice, I've got a big tile. A good tip if you want to protect your surface is you can get like tablecloths that are wipeable, so that's not a problem at all. And I literally bought these tables from IKEA, and they weren't very expensive at all. They've just got legs that screw down, which makes it really, really easy. These chairs that I've got in the background that you can see, they only cost £10 from IKEA as well, so I'm really not bothered if I've got paint on them, and it meant I could get loads, so I could have other people in here as well. So going back to our smaller workspace, I have protected it with one tile, and I love having a tile because sometimes I will actually use it as a palette as well. It might not be the best thing to do, but I do. When I was doing watercolour, we used to use a tile, and I've never quite got out of that. A tip is if you go to one of these tile shops as opposed to your B&Q, then they give you a free tile. So if you say to them, I'm just wanting to try this tile out at home, they'll give it you. Frankly, if you say to them, I'd like a tile because I'm an artist and I just want one tile, they're likely to give it you too. I've done that. So I sort of do protect those surfaces. And then I also have boards so that if I'm going over the edges, I can get a bit of paint over the edges of the board or whatever as well. So those are the things that I do which are just protecting that surface. But I tend to leave them there, and that means that I don't have to think about it when I come to paint. Now, it's completely different if you're painting on your kitchen table, but you could just have a bag that's got everything ready. And in the past, I used to just work on a board, have a bag, a little caddy that I could open up, and then everything's ready on the table. And also, you can use brush holders that will also open up. So I'll show you. You should have a picture of that now. And also, you can close them up at the end of the day. And I even take those brush holders out and about when I go outside. So they're well transportable. That's brilliant. The other thing that I do, if you're in a space where you're dedicated space where you're going to actually just be leaving things, I have got some nice jugs that I just put brushes in, and so everything's just to hand. I think I will show you my fancy art trolley. Having things like this is really great as well. So I've always thinking it's quite organised, but I've got my paint to hand, I've got my brushes to hand, and I am always thinking about an easy solution to just have everything ready. The biggest thing to think about is what inspires you, because what you want to do is you want to find a workspace that is really dedicated to your creativity. So what I mean by this is I like to have music. So I've got a little Google. I can start my playlist. So when I'm painting, I can actually just be playing music or podcasts or things like that. The other thing that I sometimes do is I'll sometimes light a candle. So these are things that are just providing an atmosphere for your creativity. So it's not just about the workspace and the practicality, which I've just talked about, of having tools and materials and everything to hand. I'm fortunate in here that I've got the sink in the corner, and that's the sort of thing where it's a practical workspace, but it's really nice to have little extras, things that you love, things that people have perhaps bought you or that you've made, so that, you know, if you can actually provide something that makes you feel good, that's really good too. And the other thing that you want to think about practically wise is lighting. So you can probably see here, I've got some overhead lights. In fact, I'll just lift that so you can just see the overhead lights. And those overhead lights are white lighting, which means that you've got natural daylight. And I'm also very fortunate that I have got windows on this side and windows on that side. Now, you may not have as good lighting as that, but what you do want to do, when I was in the back room, what I used to do, because the lighting was quite poor, I would put on top of my large easel a light, and it was quite a cheap light, but it was an external white light, so it didn't cost a lot of money. It was just from B&Q, and it wasn't one with a PIR, but that sort of lighting. And I created, in fact I didn't, George did, put a bar that came out, and then we used to have the lighting over the painting. So there's lots of other lights that you can have. I've had other lights that have attached. I don't really need them in the same way, but I still have lights over. I still have a light that points down so that I can switch on, as well as the light from the ceiling. So consider lights. You can quite often just get them that will attach to the side of your table. the thing that you've got to do with a workspace, it's not just about having a dedicated workspace, it's having a dedicated workspace that you love. That's the thing. So I'm fortunate in here that I've actually got some storage solutions as well. So I'm going to show you in my cupboards. And although it looks like I'm very messy, I am actually quite organised because I do things like label shelves and I do know where things are. Sometimes I find it difficult when I've tidied up, particularly when I've tidied up for Christmas and been very thorough. And then I'm suddenly like, I really don't know where that is. But generally, I know where everything is, and it's just really helpful to have boxes and things that group things together. So, for example, I've got all my alcohol inks in one place, I've got all my watercolours in one place, and I know that if there's something related to that, I can just go to it. Now, you probably don't have the same amount of materials as me, but grouping things so you know where to go is a great idea. And I think I can't recommend enough my art trolley. I've got on my art trolley, as well as the paint, and I've got this little tip here. Look at this. I picked this up off the internet somewhere as well, off at YouTube, but I picked up the hanging idea because if you're hanging the paint and it's coming down here, then you're always going to have your paint easily accessible. Some paints, particularly, I sort of store all of the paints on their heads. It's not so much bad with these sorts of tubes, but if you're actually using the bigger tubs, if they're on their head, then they're always going to easily come out. You don't have that squeezing problem that you have like with a mayonnaise or whatever. So this is what I found handy. I just bought these off Amazon, these little clips, and I can hang them. And I'd noticed somebody else had a similar idea and they were hanging from a pegboard, and this trolley of mine actually does have a pegboard on it. Oh, there we go. So it has a little pegboard on it, but you find that you can hang things from other places as well, so that's great. So now I'm going to walk you around my tables that I've got set up for this collection. And what I've got is I've picked out colours, I've worked all the colours out, and I've picked out some mark making materials like oil pastels, woodies, that sort of thing. And what I've done is I have put them to hand on a table. And I've also used these little, they're just like food tubs, and the food tubs I've used so that I can make larger amounts of paint because I'm working larger now. So where I normally would make up a stay wet on a tray, I've actually used these little tubs to make large amounts of paint, and they do stay quite wet. There's no problem because they've got a lid on them, and means I can just sort of pre-mix colours and find them very easily. So I've done that, and I've got that they're all ready. And even when I finish them, it doesn't matter because I've got the colour in there, so I can actually remix that colour. So that's fabulous. And then I've got whatever you can see in the background. I'm going to move over. You can see that some mediums that I'm using and the paints, they're just all there, and as well as some of the brushes. Although you will find that as I'm cleaning brushes, as I'm cleaning palette knives or whatever, then they'll be by the sink. But I do know where everything is. I've got my large easel and I've got a smaller tabletop easel, and then I have got the painting wall, and I do hang and paint on the painting wall, which is why I've sheeted it up with plastic. Now, this isn't something that has happened instantly. This is something that I've built up over many years of painting, really. And to be honest with you, moving on to the larger phase, this is something that I've only been doing very recently because I wasn't painting as big paintings. So what you need to do when you're thinking about your own workspace is think about what you need for your particular form of painting. And just, it doesn't take that much thought, but what would be easiest to have it to hand? So would it be easier to put all your brushes in a jug that you can just access them? And if you're going to do that, use a beautiful jug. I was bought a beautiful jug for Christmas and it was intended for flowers, but my son and daughter-in-law bought me this jug. 2 weeks later, I'd got paintbrushes in it and I rang them up and said, I'm really sorry, you know your beautiful jug, but I've just decided to put paintbrushes in it. And they said, that's wonderful. That's where we thought our jug would end up. And actually, it gives me a lot of pleasure. So it's little things like that that will just help that creativity because you've surrounded yourself in things that you love. I've just had a look at my notes and they say the importance of a well-organised art space. And when I say that, it doesn't always have to be perfectly tidy, but you do tend to have a cleaning sort of tidy up. So what happens with me, and I don't know if this is the same, please comment and tell me what happens in your workspaces. But what happens with me is it almost becomes creative chaos, but I'm happy in it because I sort of understand where everything is and I can put my hand to things and I don't worry too much. But if there's something that's blocking you, so for example, I've only just managed to it's a decorator's dust sheet down. And before that, I was worrying about the floor. So that was creating me some tension. I could feel it. So make sure that if you're finding that you're getting too messy, because sometimes I'll do that and I'll think, oh, I just can't carry on working. I've got to tidy up. Then tidy up at that point. But a lot of the time, it's great to be able to leave things out. Now, that might be a completely different position for you. And this is the same thing as what I was saying. You're surrounding yourself in things that you love, but also you've got to think about the way that you work that feels comfortable as well. I mean, I love getting into a mess, but then every now and then I will just have a big clean up. And then it's really nice to get it all straight again. So there is it's like disorganised organisation. For creativity, you have to allow that mess, but then you also need to be able to put your hand to things and that. So I'm hoping that you've enjoyed this and I'm hoping you've got a few tips as to what makes your space special. I think you need to think about how to make it particularly special and think about what it is that you need really. And it will depend where you are at in your own art practice. So let me know any tips that you have and whether you've found this useful. And I shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.